Hey, it's Chris. So we're doing it. So don't back anything video. I'm going to tell you reasons that you shouldn't back anything on crowdfunding. As always, just like usual, if you're okay with those negatives, if you're okay with those issues, I'm not going to say faults because they're just things you need to be aware of, things that we need to self-reflect on of why am I getting this game? FOMO, deluxification, price point. Why shouldn't you buy any of the games on crowdfunding? As many games as I can do in as short amount of time as possible. You ready? Let's go. Go big or go home. Oh, he's backing it. Don't be like me. $3 million, 5 days ago at the time of me filming this. You don't need any of it. It's not going to be any FOMO going on here. All of this is at retail. They've even said Deadpool is now going to be at retail. It's not going to be the same. There's not going to be some of the miniatures. They're not going to be some of the deluxifications. There's not going to be all the big box. There's not going to be the trifolds that go with this setup in the individual little boxes because the OP is now going to do something different. Roxley's going to sell it from the website though. So you can still get it at a slightly higher cost point, in and out of stock, however many times they do that, which is a bunch and never ending, if you will. You don't need any of it. You don't need any of it. You don't need 8 characters. You don't need 9 characters. You don't need a $25 character in the name of Deadpool. You don't need the missions because you're going to play this game head to head, not cooperatively. And you definitely don't need any of the deluxifications. And that's okay. Do you need the promo pack? No. They're just little overpowered cards that go along with all of these different 9 heroes. So you don't need it at all. You don't need to be part of the toxic community of Facebook that, basically tried to say, oh, we can't have a cloud miniature and now we have the regular miniature and we're going to throw a fit about it because we have our panties in a bunch. And that's okay. But get away from those people actually in the first place who are gatekeeping and being jerks in the first place as well. So is it really going to be that drastically different? Are the mechanics going to be unique enough? Are you one of those people that says, I just want a season 3 instead of another IP version? If you are, well, stay away from it. If you can, like the IP, like me, like X-Men, well, you go for it. But if you don't have any of those real reasons to get it, go get it for cheaper from the OP at retail when they bundle this in like 3 separate boxes or 4 separate boxes as a whole. So you can easily pass on it from the price point. You don't need to spend $500 on this game unless this is an absolute lifestyle game. This is the lifestyle money being thrown around here, folks. And I heard some people like, I'm going to get 2 or 3 even, and we're going to share the... Oh, holy crap. You're spending $500 on King of Tokyo. That's what you're doing. It's okay. I love King of Tokyo. Do you love it that much, though? Critter Kitchen. We're going to go to Critter Kitchen now, and we're going to say, do you like Flamecraft? Do you want something slightly better than Flamecraft? No qualms about Flamecraft as a whole, but the main selling point of Flamecraft was a lot of the additional cuteness and extras that went along with this. I think this is a better game looking wise, based on the rulebook, than Flamecraft in the first place. I am seriously considering getting this. At retail, though, because most of the deluxifications are not really worth it. Now, the issue I have, though, is they're locking some gameplay content in here as well. Now, you don't want the extra expansion with the extra player. Well, that's the other issue I have with it as well, that you're getting with this little a la carte expansion, right? It's giving you basically a 5th player expansion and a whole bunch of extras. Or, sorry, not even 5th player, 6th and 7th player. You're not going to play this game with 5 people, let alone 6 and 7, so you don't need the expansion. Do you need the additional content? No, because again, you're only going to play this 3 times before it makes it off your hotness and rotation and before you play something else, and you're going to forget about this one in the back of your closet like you did Flamecraft in the first place. Because, again, people like Flamecraft, but people also weren't like, wow, game of the year, either. And this one may not be for you either in that sense, although I like the mechanics of the auctioning, bidding style, things that they're doing different here in terms of the racing with your 3 different workers, in terms of priority that you're going to be placing at the different locations. I think the gameplay overall is better, but again, unless you're going for 6th or 7th player junkie and you really need some of this additional asymmetry that it's going to offer, pass on it. Pick it up at retail. Trade for somebody's copy. This is the ultimate trade for somebody's copy. Now, Calvert Alchemy doesn't put out a lot of the deluxifications at retail. That's the only FOMO that you're going to have to deal with there along those sides of things. Spirit Fire. At the time of me filming this, there's not even any gameplay out yet. Apparently I wasn't the only one on the roundup the other week that said, this is a very sort of fluff crowdfunding campaign. Where's the meat? Where's the bones? Where's the mechanics? This is a great solo player only game. If you are not a solo player, do not buy this game. If you're a solo player, this may be up your ilk. But is it going to be any better? It's very nebulous right now. I don't know why you'd launch a campaign and not have any actual gameplay content, rule book halfway through the campaign. This is by a company that knows what they're doing, that should have some of this stuff out. Again, this boggles my mind. I said it with Molly House when Molly House launched too. I don't care how big your name is behind your company or the pedigree of your games. If you can't have that out at crowdfunding launch, why are you launching? Wait to launch. What is this rush to push the campaign out without all the information? It makes me feel like you're more concerned about getting people to FOMO than you are about putting the right product in the right hands. And shortly after I film this, there's allegedly going to be more gameplay content coming out. But again, it boggles my mind as a solo-only game where you're going to be narratively adventuring with a different color aesthetic of your choice. Like, when that's the biggest selling point right now is the color aesthetic of the game box, that should be a warning to you. Not that it's a bad game, but maybe it's not the right game for you. Blinking red light right there. So, again, I'm not going to argue content. I'm not going to argue that you're not going to get your money's worth. But if this lifestyle open world narrative campaign that's no combat, but wait, combat skill checks isn't going to be right for you. If you didn't like Seventh Continent, this probably isn't going to be your piece of cake either. And so that's not going to change your mind. I'm a non-solo player, so I don't think this solo mainly game, although they say you can handhold cooperative just like Dragon Eclipse did, this isn't going to be your ilk. It isn't. And that's okay. Orange Nebula, great products, but not for everybody. And this one is, again, triple freaking digit price points to even get in. You have to literally pay almost $200 just to be able to play this with other people. Right? Holy cow. Holy cow. This is a $40 retail game. I said it there. I say behind it. It's a big box though. This is a $40 retail game with a whole lot of extras that I worry about. You know, if you're going to criticize Awakened Realms for being over sprawling, that's what I have concerns about with this one too. I don't know. There you go. Old King's Crown. I said this in my freaking video of Old King's Crown. This isn't going to be it for everybody. There's too much blind bluffing, bidding, dynamic with unpredictability, with too much asymmetry for people. This is going to be root light. If you like the asymmetry, you're not going to need to know as much, but you're still going to need to know what other people's powers are. If you don't keep track of other people's powers, well, your plans are just going to go kaput at any point. The simultaneous card play is fantastic, but it's not going to be for everyone because it's going to be mean, it's going to be manipulating, and it's going to just go until somebody gets the 20 points that you need in the first place. The areas are going to be all different. The strategy is not going to be apparent, and the deck building as you play it in a meta style evolving situation is not going to be for you. It's Oriflamme meets Zuvetus meets Root. All of those together. And if that combination doesn't sound good, just like Root isn't for everybody, this isn't for everybody. It's a fantastic game. The illustrations and the aesthetic is probably second to none on crowdfunding right now, or that's come out in the last couple months. But if those mechanics don't suit you, just like Zuvetus, it's not going to suit you either just because you're trying to pigeonhole it in. It's not inexpensive. You're going to get a little bit of an expansion to go along with it, but you're still going to be talking somehow this is making a triple digit price point, including shipping, by the time it ends. And that's an insane price for a game that you might be going, can I actually get this played from a meta style that this is going to need repeated plays of? Because the terminology is deep. The terminology is not as intuitive as you may like. And with those dynamics, that's going to make it tougher to learn in the first place. Not to get to the table, but to actually understand what you're doing. Fantastic game, not for you. U-Boat, you don't need this game. This is Captain Sonar on steroids. This is like if Captain Sonar took all of the steroids that Arnold Schwarzenegger did, poured them into one situation on a board game and said, here you go, here's Galactus, the miniature, right? Only we're going to tilt him sideways and put him on your table that way instead and pretend it's a boat. And you need simultaneous action play where you're each asymmetric characters manning a U-Boat? No, you don't have the dynamic or the group for this. You don't. You can't get Captain Sonar played with half the length of this game. Now you're going to complexify it and deluxify it up the wazooks and, quintuple or, even more the price? No, that's not going to be a good fit. I don't care if it's, oh, good gracious, 200 freaking pounds. That's insane. That's insane. It is. It's insane. You're paying for Galactus here. So if you weren't a fan of Galactus, if you're not a fan of deluxifications, this is a deluxification. It's just plastic. People don't think of miniature games now as deluxification games. They are. Every single one of them is. No qualms about it. You could have them replaced with standees. You could have them replace them with cubes. Doesn't matter. But you have to just treat them all the same. Equally discriminatory here on this channel when it comes to board games only. But this is a ton of money. This is an absolute freaking metric ton of money for this. And they've now plastified everything else as well. So if this is not, again, an absolute lifestyle game where you want an absolute, simulator version of manning a U-boat, this game is an easy pass. It's going to be too complex. It's going to be too long. It's going to be too asymmetric, just like we talked about with Old King's Crown. Dracula's Curse. I covered this one. Somehow this has $200,000. It's a very beautiful aesthetic looking game. And they were supposed to put out more of an update recently with an actual gameplay content. It broke 100,000 after it launched without any details of what the gameplay is looking like apart from a few GIFs on the screen in the first place. And so the dynamic of, one versus all, Dracula versus the Hunters was what it was going for. And again, it's very interesting because I don't see that highlighted. I don't see people being concerned about it, that as the one versus all mechanic is probably one of the least enjoyed mechanics overall by people in the hobby. And I don't say that disparagingly. I love one versus all, right? See my Beast video last month. But I hear a lot of gripes about that in general. And so for this to get, especially as a non Simon-esque, vibe game, that much money, that's a lot of money for people willing to put down for a first-time creator, especially when you've got some of this larger, ambitious campaign style projection going on. They're putting stretch goal after stretch goal out, but the 2 updates that are done at the time of me filming this, again, no gameplay, no rulebook, and they're updating you on backing a book of Dracula rather than putting out some of that information. And again, if you don't put a rulebook up by the time you've already, funded as well as been on campaign for over a week or 2, that's a small yellow flag for me. It is. I can't say enough about knowing what you're getting yourself into for triple-digit price points. This is an expansive, ambitious game. No problems about saying that. No problem with it. But again, are you willing to wager this? When I do my crowdfunding roundup on a weekly basis, when I do my crowdfunding look back of a year or 2, I still did the one from this past month that we're 2 years out from a game that wasn't even in production yet. That's what I worry about with a game like this. Not that it's going to be bad, but are you willing to take a chance on it and have that money tied up for that long of, not being able to put it elsewhere to good use? So there you go. Cascadero, if you don't like some of the other Nizia games, this isn't going to change your mind. I like it because it's got a reverse style placement putting in terms of scoring points, and it's got more of a track that's going to score you points rather than the points you're scoring from the actual workers you're placing on the board on the hexes. People make the argument that it's not different enough than Yellow and Yangtze or Blue Lagoon or whatever, right? And having one of them is, you're going to have too many of them already. No, this is different enough. Cascadito's an absolutely fantastic roll and write. You don't need either of them, though. It's going to be a cheaper price point. The one small caveat I will say is with board game tables, which we're going to talk about in a second, they're actually combining the campaigns for shipping. So if you buy one of these, you buy something on the triple campaign of All Play right now, you can save money, which is actually kind of crazy. I've never seen that before. But yeah, you don't need this. This is maybe going to be cheaper at retail. Bitewing's a hit or miss. But if you're not in love with the Nizias, if you don't like mean games, this is, just like the next Nizia we'll talk about, this is a very, very mean game. This is a very mean game. And you're not going to like it from that aspect. You're going to cut people off. You're going to outmaneuver them. You're going to outplace them. And you're going to get frustrated, especially at the higher player counts. And if you don't enjoy that style of take that game, this one isn't going to be for you. Cascadito, again, in the same way. It uses the same mechanic. If you don't like it in Cascadero, Cascadito is not going to change your mind, even with 4 different maps that are going to be provided for you. So, yeah. It's just a question of, are you going to back Bitewing games, and are you going to look at it and try and get it at retail cheaper? And speaking of that, though, let's just go straight to it. I'm going to skip to it. I'll skip over the other ones I was going to plan on doing in this order. Well, Through the Desert, Message from the Stars, and Switchbacks. My number 1 lesson on this one is you don't buy all 3. They say you get more content. You get the little mini expansion content that you get along with all of them individually. If you get them all 3, you get that all for free. However, buying more to save more is never worth it. You're still spending a lot more than you would have if you just bought one of them. Again, Through the Desert, it's going to be a very mean Nizia take that game. Really, probably meaner than a lot of the other ones in his collection of these tile laying games in the first place. Do you need it? No. Is it going to be drastically different than the original? Well, this is where the price point is going to be varied. You can't really buy the original right now, and so this is actually probably a pretty freaking good price point. Do you need the expansion, though? No. Am I going to get the expansion? Probably, because I'm going to FOMO a little bit. But is it something that you absolutely need? No. Switchbacks, again, is a very Zen-like or very mean tile laying game with workers that you're going to be placed on a random number situation, which is going to be way too chaotic for you in the first place or way too mean in the second place. The third one, A Message from the Stars, is, a search for Planet X, only taken with a decrypto style of approach, and it's going to be a lot more perfect information, word style guessing games than you may like in the first place. If you aren't a word guessing game person, if you aren't a pure deductive logic person, this one's going to be an easy pass as well. Nothing about it is going to change your mind. And again, you're going to have to get it and see if you like it to know. And that's the thing I see all the time on these campaigns is people buy all 3 of them and sell at least 2 of them, because they went in for the price point reduction, cost savings, rather than the, does this game absolutely perfectly fit me? And I'm speaking about my own self here, not you guys. Of course, you guys wouldn't do that at all whatsoever. Speaking of that, keep the heroes out boss battles. Again, if you don't like a tower defense reverse cooperative style game, this isn't going to be any of your ilk. If you don't like randomness of drawing cards and seeing what the AI system is going to do that's randomly going to screw you over, this isn't going to change your mind either. If you don't like the wooden meeples, if you don't like to pay a little bit of a deluxified price point from this game from Brewa Games, you're not going to like this either. And this isn't going to change your mind because this is going to give you more of it, but now it's including a boss situation, not just a straight up boss battle, but a boss at the end of what you're going to be doing in the first place. And that's going to be the tricky point, right? Is this game maybe a little bit too long for what it is at sometimes in the first place? Yeah, it is. And then you're adding a boss on the end of it that's going to complicate it and add a little bit more game length, even though it's not going to add too much game complexity. That could be your biggest issue. Do you like playing as the bad guys? Do you like being cooperative? Do you like not having alpha gaming? Well, if you have issues with any of those, well, you might want to be missing out. So if you don't like alpha issues, you don't like playing as the bad guys, you don't like dealing with the randomness that comes from the AI deck that you're going to have to cycle through twice in order to see where these random heroes get placed in your dungeon, and the randomness of the dungeon scenario and the setup in terms of figuring out where stuff goes and how stuff is going to interact, well, this isn't going to be for you. It gives you scenario-based systems, which are actually really nice and compact and gives you plenty in the first place. But as a small indie game company, you're also going to pay a premium, but you're not necessarily going to be able to get on the secondary market. So that's the one thing you have to consider is, am I willing to just completely miss out on it? Because a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily as widely available, at least in North America. Yes, I heard you in the Europe comments that it's widely available over in Europe. Well, it's not in America. So, that's probably because that's where the designer's from. So it's a little bit easier to have your product distributed over there in the first place. Again, people aren't going to like this aesthetic either. Not that you really should be most concerned about aesthetic. You need to be gameplay content wise first and foremost. And if the gameplay content doesn't fit with you, then you pass it as well, because again, you're looking at somewhere between probably $70 and $100 to get it all at this point if you want, or just even the base game plus a little bit of extra. And that's a big price point for a cooperative game that's a little bit lighter overall mechanistically, and that may turn people off on the crowdfunding side of things when there's other alternatives out there at a retail that are more proven in the first place. Going the opposite direction though, we're going with Ezra and Nehemiah. Another classic Garfield. Well, there's absolutely no reason that you need to get it on a crowdfunding except if you want metal coins and a promo pack. And they're flat out saying that, and they said it every time, and I say that every time, and that's okay because you still have 3,600 people that will support them as a heavier worker placement Euro style game. The only question I have is, has this different significantly enough from the other Garfield games? Now, it's not using more of a dice worker placement in this one as opposed to some of the other ones, but the fear is that this one is going to be potentially a lot heavier than several of the last ones that have come out. I don't know exactly how it's going to compare to Wayfarers or Scholars of the South Tigris, but I'm going to imagine it's at least at that weight, if not a little higher. And so how many of those games can you have in your collection? How many of those weight can you actually get played on a regular basis? And again, is the promo pack really going to be worth it? And the answer to the promo pack, just like I said with Marvel Dice Throne, is no. Promo packs are never worth it. Promo packs are never going to be played enough or be utilized enough in order to get your money's worth or to make you feel like you're paying an extra $20 or $30 in the first place for it. If you want to support them at retail, they're glad to have you do that, and they're okay with that in the first place, and they don't have any problem with saying that. And I love that, and I give them kudos for that every time. And that's why if you're really interested in this, you go pick up the retail and you make sure it's a game that's going to be right for you over 7 days as you're slowly trying to rebuild the temple, get the profits back, and do everything that comes with building the walls around the city in the first place. Incentivize, wait and see. It's okay. You can do that too. Next up, Nocturne. Again, this is going to be too light. This is going to be too light for you. You're not going to like it because it's going to be too light. It's going to be too random. It's going to be too chaotic in terms of the bidding as you lay your tokens down, trying to slowly outmaneuver, outbid people in the first place. Again, flat out games that they don't really do any exclusives. You're going to get a little extra. It's going to be slightly price point saving, especially with the shipping, but there's really no incentive or reason that it's not going to be available after their retail shop at the end of the campaign when you can get it that way. And it tends to be like relatively exactly the same price. And so you're not necessarily going to miss out. You don't even need to pledge during the campaign. You can probably pledge like halfway through production and still get the same price with the same cost efficiency and see whether or not you like it at that standpoint. Or if you're like me, you can just end up trading for a copy because inevitably people always go, I'm going to like this light style game. And they pick ones that they don't actually read the rulebook for or don't look through the gameplay and they don't like it in the first place because it's too light. But even though it said it's light and it's not supposed to be heavy and it's going to be more random and it shouldn't be a surprise to you at this point, but too many people go off of the previous pedigree, and you can't do that because otherwise you end up with a copy of fit to print that you're not really enthusiastic with, even though you thought you were going to love it in the first place, because that happens. And this is the big FOMO aspect of that is, you see the pedigree that they put out with Caligo Cascadia, fit to print, as well as Verdant, and you say, okay, well, if those were also successful, this one must be successful too. And again, people have their varied opinions on those, and people prefer ultimately one or two of them above all of the others. And so this one is going to hold true in that sense, and flat out does a good product, but you can get it later and still support them at retail as well. Let's go to the game for a second here. Witcher Path of Destiny. You don't need this game. This is a light engine tableau building narrative style campaign game, and it's not really going to fit you. It's going to be too light. People aren't going to like it for what it is, and it's over deluxified for what it is in the first place. There's no reason for miniatures in engine building tableau game. None. at least as far as I can tell. And they're expansionifying the hell out of it right now as well. And so if you're not interested in it from a deluxified gameplay standpoint, well, you may be FOMOing on a little bit of the gameplay content, because just like with the previous Go On Board project with the other Witcher game that they put out, some of these stretch goals are going to be exclusive, and you're going to have to essentially resist getting some of it as well. You're going to miss out some of the deluxified miniatures here, but the tableau building engine management style of things, again, this is not just a Witcher IP. This is a more of an engine building tableau style, which is going to have some randomness based on who has the most icons in each area, and how do you like that? And are all the expansions going to be equal? Are they going to all be balanced as much as you may like? Because as you can see on the add-ons here, we've already got 2 expansions that have been announced, and you're going to have more probably coming between now and the end of the campaign. Again, I don't think the price point is bad, but you're going to have to FOMO, and you're going to have to go for it from the exclusivity that's going to come with it. And there's really probably not a whole lot of reason to get the standard pledge unless you want some of the little deluxified extras that are going to be available that you won't be able to get on the secondary campaign side of things at retail. So it's an expensive game though for an engine builder, right? $85 is not inexpensive, because a lot of that price point is going to go into the miniatures there in the first place. So gameplay content wise, heaviness versus the price point, yeah, it's a little bit lower than what you'd expect, but with the deluxified miniatures here, you're going to be paying for it in that sense a little bit with the IP too. Secrets of the Lost Tomb here, you don't need to spend $5,000 to get this game, right? You don't need it. The only problem is, again, this looks like an absolutely fantastic light style dice chucking cooperative game with a lot of randomness, a lot of take that, and a lot of flipping over tiles and finding cool stuff and taking lots of actions. But there are a lot of actions you're gonna have to wade through. There's a lot of iconography. There's a lot of stats and skills you're gonna have to keep track of. And there's gonna be way too much randomness as you're flipping these tiles over, trying to find the different levels of the tomb in order to go up and down and complete the quest before you lose. There's way too many expansions to know which ones are good. There's even like 3 new expansions that are gonna go along with things. So even if you were familiar with all the other expansions previously, you're not gonna know how they're going to be differing or what is actually going to be that much dramatically different, apart from like enemies and items and a little bit of the superfluous stuff. There's just not as much campaign information on that side of things that you're going to be seeing here in the campaign in the first place. And it's going to be sort of your mileage may vary in terms of which expansion you like, which one's going to suit your needs. It sort of reminds me very similarly of Marvel United, where it wasn't really easy to tell which ones I was going to be best suited for or which ones were going to be the best fit. And you end up getting them all, and you end up not liking half of them and trying to sell them. But now that has a much wider audience and much wider market in the first place. Are you going to be willing to do this or able to do this with all of these new expansions of 16 freaking different ones? That's like 2 Marvel United campaigns all thrown together plus a little bit extra. And that's a lot of money, folks. That's a lot of money. And you should never be paying monthly installments on a board game. If you are ever considering monthly installments on any of this easy pay stuff, you are absolutely doing yourself a disservice, and you should never go into debt or, monthly management of car-like payments. Again, I think the gameplay is interesting. I don't think this is going to be widely accessible, right? Like, it's not taking the Restoration Games route of Thunder Road Vendetta, where at least there's a retail copy of version that you can get into and know whether or not it's like for you. But the, basic pledge level here is going to cost you over $100 shipped. And that's a lot for this light style cooperative game with a remake twist of things. Even if you're getting a free expansion pack, I don't care who you are, because it's going to cost you almost twice that just to get the new expansions along with it for 3 expansions, which again is a lot of money, $200. You need to make sure you love this game fantastically in the first place. Wonderful Creatures. This looks like a very solid game, but you may not have liked their other previous games of Wild Serengeti and Life of Amazonia. And this double-use worker placement with the changing hexes and the resources versus card pickup that you're going to be having to deal with when you place your workers down in the first place is not going to behoove people as much as they otherwise might like. There's going to be a lot of potential overlapping and maneuvering for different spaces. It's going to be a little too tight for people. It's going to be a little bit too mean or cutthroat putting your workers down in the first place and trying to upgrade your workers in order to figure out the best min-max that you're going to be taking along the way. I mean, again, you know me, I love some wooden meeples. I love the aesthetic of this. It's absolutely fantastic. It looks innovative. It actually looks very interesting from that aspect of things. But with Bad Comet, a few of their other ones have been a little bit cheaper at retail. And so you have to ask yourself right now, like, why are you getting it on Kickstarter? And some exclusive content here. And what is that exclusive content though? Well, it's meeples and a little bit of promo content. Are you okay with that? Because it says it's replacing other meeples. It's not necessarily adding new gameplay content there, so you're not necessarily missing much apart from a slight deluxification in the first place. And if you're going to actually get that pledge level, it's still going to cost you probably $100 ship. So another deluxified Euro game, which looks like it actually is doing something unique, but unique is a double-edged sword nowadays on crowdfunding in the first place, right? Unique means doing something slightly different. Unique means that you don't see it before in similar ways. Unique means that you don't then know whether or not it's going to suit your needs in the first place, because unique means something up here, but it actually doesn't always translate down here to the table. Speaking of real-time games, I love Bullet. I did not like Fit to Print, both dramatically utilizing the real-time mechanic, but yet somehow one of them fell more flat than the other one for me, and one of them is probably not going to stay in my collection, and the other one's a top 5 game as a whole. So thinking about what you like, but actually the practicality of it in the first place, that would be my fear with this game in general. So take that as well what you will with a grain of salt, even though it looks absolutely fantastic, just like the other games from Bad Comet have in the past. My favorite things, the String Railway Collection. You don't need a social deduction, light party style game of my favorite things. It's going to be categories on steroids. That's what it is. It's reverse categories with a slight twist. If you don't like categories, you won't like this game. If you like that sort of thing, great, go for it, but you're going to pay a pretty penny too. String collection, string railway, I mean, you're putting strings around on a map, basically doing a pick up and deliver style of things if you get the simple versus the complex version. It's strings connecting tiles. It's one of those games where you kind of wish you could have thought of it. Are you essentially willing to pay about $70 shipped for both of these light style games? Because that's not inexpensive comparatively. And again, I don't care how good or who thinks this game is good. If you aren't having the group for this in the first place, you're not going to like it. It's a little fancier version of those games that I mentioned. I think the mechanism is cool. It's going to work for some people, but you have to like this party style game in the first place. If you're not a party style person, this is going to change your mind. If you don't like the idea of moving strings around and really doing a 2 to 5 player overlapping, more of spatial arrangement side of things, like spatial arrangements sound good in my head. I hardly ever have good success with them with the actual practicality of them. I'm looking at things like block and key behind me, which it just never really clicked as a whole. And same thing with like Catacomb Cubes, and same things even with a little bit in the sense of Tiny Towns. So this is going to be similar, only instead of using cubes, this is going to do strings. And again, I think the aesthetic is cool, but this is one I'd rather play at somebody else's house than necessarily buy and risk it from that aspect right now as a whole. Then we're going to Source and TimeStrike. Well, I mean, do you actually have a group that plays HeroScape? Do you have a group that plays Warhammer? Do you have a group that plays something along those lines relatively regularly? Because this is an absolutely fantastic product, only if you do. The price point's good, but if you can't get this stuff assembled, if you don't have the regular group that's going to meet for D&D on a couple times a month basis, well, then it's going to sit on your shelf just like the other board games that are collecting dust, still, and shrink will as well. So the TimeStrike is going to be a lighter style of HeroScape, if you will. It's going to be very similar. Do you want to see that? It's still very much in a work in progress, and therein goes some of the potential of these games. Are you willing to take a risk for potential? And if you are, well, great. If you aren't, well, again, maybe wait, and your mileage may vary, and you can kind of see. Again, with any campaign like this that is doing multiple aspects and multiple avenues, I always worry about the utmost best product in all of those areas, because I think you can spread yourself a little too thin if you're doing, for example, solo, cooperative, and competitive, right? One of those may be excellent, the other two may be okay, and that's what I fear in all situations where I see RPG, games, solo, whatever else, and so they have an absolutely fantastic product here from the actual plastic terrain style of things, but the gameplay is going to be a lot lighter, and it's not necessarily going to suit you unless you're looking for a light zombie hero side-esque vibe in the first place. And so if you are, again, it's going to be a little more expensive though from that aspect, and the best value is still going to be Source, but you need to know because you have to select the group to play it, even as cool aesthetically as it looks. Now we have Moon Deluxe with a reprint with a whole bunch of deluxifications to go along with it. This is a heavier version of Seventh Wonders, and it's an absolutely great game. I reviewed it last month, but it's not going to be for everyone because it's going to be a little bit longer. There's going to be a lot of card action, card play, engine building, keeping track of things over 3 rounds in order to figure out whether or not you are ultimately the victory point winner at the end. And again, it's going to be very iconography heavy of keeping track of a lot of these cards as you lay them out, as you build them. So it's not going to be as intuitive as Seventh Wonders. It's going to give you a little more depth, but also it's not going to give you the playtime either. And you're going to have a lot more concentration and a lot more thinking about how these dynamics as well as these objectives that you're going to be trying to balance alongside what your other opponents are doing at the same time, because there's going to be a lot to keep track of. And that's going to be the biggest barrier to a lot of people loving this game in the first place. It's great for what it is, but it is also not anything other than what it is, if that makes sense. You cannot go into this going, okay, we're going to play this in half an hour, right? This is an hour and a half of Seven Wonders, right? If you will. And so do you need all the deluxifications as well? That's going to be what you have to ask yourself in this sense. And that's okay if it is your thing, but if it doesn't appeal to you in those manner and it doesn't fit exactly what you're looking for in that sense, it could easily fall flat in addition. Now, next up, Solforge. I mean, again, this is one that TCG-esque model with multiple adaptability with deck customization and deck construction. Deck construction, taking 2 sets of 10 cards and mixing them together. But those 10 cards are going to be where you're going to have to do that even prior to the game setup. And do you have the wherewithal for that? The main crux of this campaign, though, it seems to be more focused on the digital side of things. So getting it early on the card access side of things is probably less important overall. I can't tell you whether or not this is a great price, but it's going to be something where you really have to love a meta deck construction Magic the Gathering style, because it's also by Garfield from Magic the Gathering in the first place. So the influence is heavy-handed all over the place in terms of that, but at least has a smaller footprint on the actual what am I doing with it, so that it's going to be a little bit more accessible to get it to the table in the first place. Do you want the digital? That's going to be the main aspect of asking yourself in this campaign as a whole. If the answer is no, go pick it up later from that aspect. Saw, the Jigsaw Trials. There's not really a whole lot of reason to get this one unless you're going for deluxeification. With a set collection building with a hand limit of 8, you're going to be slowly building up a trap in front of you to basically be able to do head-to-head, straightforward, majority mechanic, take that. Because all you do once you have your trap built is you play it and you make someone else try and defend it. And they're going to be having to play cards from their hand to match the characteristic or the aspect that your trap tests. And if they just don't have the right stuff, well, yeah, they have to play cards in their hand that can help them mitigate that, but they also may not, and it may just leave you up and dry in terms of, well, your blood loss. Having traps that either going to cause limb loss or blood loss until there's just one person standing. So this is heavy, 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 heavy take that in a set collection style manner. And those two things you don't often see together, but that's what you've got going on here. And like I said, Deluxeified Collector's Edition is really going to be the reason, because otherwise I think the retail edition right here is still going to cost you $5 plus shipping in advance. And that's a lot for a card-driven set collection style game on crowdfunding. Say what you will about the content. Otherwise, you're probably paying a little bit of an IP price there in addition. Last up here, we'll talk about Wild Duo, just because I like talking about abstracts. 5 abstracts in one. $28,000. The thing I'll say with this is when I looked at all 5 of these abstracts, a lot of them are very similar to other abstracts you may be familiar with, a little bit of smashed together, if you will. I talked about Wano, I talked about Tak, I talked about Zar. There's a little bit of combination, especially even with this first one here. It's a little bit of Tak meets Zar as a whole. Again, not saying that is a bad thing, but I'm saying as you're going to recognize mechanisms if you're an abstract fan in the first place like me, and you're going to say, okay, how different are these? And am I going to actually prefer these over the ones that are out there already? Now, it's got a cute animal aesthetic vibe that people are apparently digging, and so maybe that's more of the mass market appeal. You want a Tak with a theme, right? Abstracts and theme anyway, but take that for what it is. If you don't like abstracts, folks, don't get fooled by the pretty colors. Pretty colors, not gameplay. Gameplay needs to be your focus here. Not an abstract lover. Pretty colors ain't going to change that. Period. And the problem with a 5-in-1 like this, just like I said with All Play's campaign earlier, is that you're probably going to like 2 or 3 of these or one of these above all else. And guess what? You're going to pay for them all. How do you feel about that when you only like half the elements of a game? You know, I think of Oceans, where I really liked the second half of the game, but I wasn't as much a fan of the first half of the game, so I ultimately ended up trading it as much as I loved the deep deck. And so that's what my fear would be with this, right? Is that you're going to open this up and go, I'm only going to play this one every single time. And then I have these other 4 that are just sitting there taking up space and collecting dust. Again, small box, small imprint, small footprint, but it's still money that you could spend elsewhere or just save, frankly, in general. I don't even know why you're on crowdfunding if you're trying to save money, though. Who are we kidding? That's it. Don't back anything unless, obviously, you like those things, and all of those things aren't bad things for you. And if they're not bad things for you, well, support publishers you like. But also, don't FOMO, don't have too many games. If you have as many games as I do, well, you should have a channel, and that should be why you have that many games in the first place. Otherwise, sell a bunch of games like I'm trying to do. That's all I got! But also, don't be like me. Don't hate yourself for backing something. Not saying that I'm hating myself for not being able to stop myself from FOMOing right now on Dice Throne Marvel X-Men, but the struggle is real, folks. I hear you. I am one of you. Gotcha. Have a great freaking day. Stay classy. See you around.